The clay is Canaanite, dug from the coastal plain, the same earth the locals have worked for generations. But the hands that shaped these jars learned their craft somewhere else, somewhere across the water. The forms are Aegean, the geometric bands of red and black, the bold decorative registers, the firing technique. All of it carries the imprint of a tradition that belongs to another shore entirely. The Philistine potters have not brought foreign clay to Canaan. They have brought foreign knowledge, and they are pressing it into Canaanite earth. The jars appear in Ashkelon sometime around 1175 BC, in buildings that are also newly constructed, in a city that is being remade by its new inhabitants. The people who made them have only recently arrived. Their origins are, for 3,000 years, a matter of inference and argument, until the bones speak. Beneath the floors of these same early buildings, archaeologists will eventually find infant burials. They will extract ancient DNA, and in 2019, the results will confirm what the pottery had been quietly suggesting all along. These people came from somewhere else. They brought their culture with them. And then, within a few generations, they began to change. This is where the Philistine story actually begins. Not with Goliath, not with Samson, with a jar. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the Philistines, Israel's great biblical antagonists, recovered from the ground. Their cities, their DNA, their temples, and the far more complex civilization hiding behind the name history gave them as an insult. To understand who the Philistines were, you have to understand the world they arrived into, because they didn't arrive into a vacuum. The year is approximately 1200 BC. Across the eastern Mediterranean, one of the most catastrophic collapses in ancient history is underway. The great palace civilizations of the Bronze Age, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Ugaritic trading networks of the Levantine coast, are failing simultaneously. Cities are burning. Trade routes that had sustained complex economies for centuries are severing. Scholars call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, and its causes are still debated. Drought, internal rebellion, systems failure, and the movement of displaced populations all appear to have played a role. Into this chaos come groups of migrants the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples, a collective term used in Egyptian records, including the reliefs at Medinet Habu commissioned by Pharaoh Ramesses III, to describe waves of displaced populations pressing southward along the Levantine coast. Among them, apparently, are the people who will become the Philistines. Ramesses III claims to have defeated them in a great naval battle around 1175 BC. Whether he actually stopped them or simply redirected them is debated. What is clear is that within a generation, a distinct culture with Aegean material characteristics has established itself along the southern coastal plain of Canaan, in 5 cities that will become famous in the pages of Scripture: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. This is the world the Philistines built, and for nearly a century, archaeologists have been digging it up. The Hebrew Bible introduces the Philistines as a persistent and formidable adversary. They appear first in the patriarchal narratives. Abraham and Isaac both have dealings with a Philistine king named Abimelech at Gerar. This creates a genuine chronological puzzle for archaeologists. since the mass Philistine settlement of the coastal plain peaks several centuries after the patriarchal era as traditionally understood. It is a puzzle the text does not resolve, and archaeology has not yet fully answered. The Philistines as a major political force emerge most fully in the period of the Judges and the early monarchy, the 11th and 10th centuries BC, when the conflict between Philistia and the emerging Israelite confederation defines an era. Samson tears down their temples. Samuel defeats them at Mizpah. Saul fights and dies against them at Jezreel. David slays their champion at the Valley of Elah. These are among the most vivid military and personal confrontations in all of Scripture. But who were the people on the other side of those encounters? The excavations begin to answer that question. At Tel Miqne, in the Shephelah foothills southeast of Ashdod, archaeologists identified the site as ancient Ekron beginning in the 1980s. The excavations, led by Trude Dothan and Seymour Geaton, revealed a city that grew dramatically in the Iron Age I period, the era of the Judges, before contracting and then expanding again in the 7th century BC into one of the largest olive oil production centers in the ancient Near East. Over 100 olive oil presses have been identified at Ekron. The scale is industrial. This was not a primitive settlement scratching at subsistence agriculture. It was a sophisticated commercial operation integrated into the broader regional economy. More striking still was what Dothan and Geaton found in the cultic precinct at Ekron. A temple complex dating to the 7th century BC contained a dedicatory inscription, one of the few royal Philistine inscriptions ever recovered, naming the kings of Ekron in sequence and dedicating the temple to a goddess whose name is rendered as Ptgyn in the inscription, a figure scholars have connected to the goddess Asherah or to a local variant of Aegean religious tradition. The inscription is important for two reasons. It confirms the biblical account of Ekron's identity and location, and it gives us a direct look at Philistine royal religion in their own words, rather than through their enemies' descriptions. At Tel es-Safi, rising above the Elah Valley on the northern edge of Philistia, excavations directed by Aaron Meyer of Bar Ilan University have been ongoing since 1996, and the identification of the site as ancient Gath, the city of Goliath, is now well established in the scholarly literature. Gath turns out to have been the largest Philistine city during the Iron Age I and early Iron Age II periods. The excavations at Tel es-Safi have produced some of the most remarkable finds in Philistine archaeology, a massive destruction layer consistent with the campaign of Hazael of Aram Damascus around 830 BC, matching the account in 2 Kings 12 where Hazael attacks Gath, extensive evidence of monumental architecture, and, in a detail that has attracted significant attention, a ceramic sherd from the 10th or early 9th century BC inscribed with two names, LWT and WLT, which Mayer and colleagues have identified as non-Semitic names phonetically similar to the name Goliath in its Semitic rendering. This does not prove the biblical Goliath existed, and Mayer himself has been careful about that claim. But it does confirm that names of this phonetic type were in use in Gath during roughly the period the biblical narrative places the encounter. It is at Ashkelon, however, that the most scientifically significant discovery of recent Philistine archaeology was made. Ashkelon, on the Mediterranean coast south of modern Tel Aviv, was excavated for decades under the direction of Lawrence Steger of Harvard University. The excavations uncovered the city through multiple periods of occupation, but it was work on the early Iron Age strata, the earliest Philistine layers, that produced something extraordinary. Beneath the floors of buildings dating to the initial Philistine settlement period, archaeologists found infant burials. This is not unusual in the ancient Near East. Infant burials under house floors were a common practice, but these infants were carefully sampled for ancient DNA. The 2019 study published in Science Advances, led by archaeogeneticist Michael Feldman and an international team of researchers, analyzed ancient DNA extracted from 10 individuals from early Iron Age Ashkelon, the founding generation of the Philistine city, and compared them to individuals from later periods and from the wider regional population. The results were significant. The early Iron Age individuals showed a clear influx of genetic ancestry consistent with Southern European populations, specifically populations associated with the Aegean and Sardinian genetic profiles from the same period. This European-sourced genetic component was not present in the preceding Bronze Age Canaanite population at Ashkelon, and it decreased substantially in later Iron Age individuals from the same site. What the DNA appears to show is a pattern consistent with the historical model. A founding population that arrived from the Aegean region, brought their own genetic profile and material culture, and then, within a few generations, began to intermarry with and assimilate into the broader local population. By the Iron Age II period, the distinct European genetic signature had largely been absorbed. The Philistines became, over time, a Mediterranean Levantine people. This is important for reading the biblical narrative. The Philistines of Samson and the Philistines of David's court are not the same cultural formation as the Philistines who arrived on those shores in the 12th century BC. They are a people already in the process of transformation. What did Philistine daily life actually look like? The material record paints a picture strikingly different from the adversarial outline the biblical text provides. Philistine pottery, the decorated bichrome ware of the early period, is among the most visually distinctive ceramic traditions in Iron Age Canaan. It draws on Mycenaean and Cypriot shapes and decorative motifs, waterfowl, spirals, geometric patterns in red and black on a cream slip. It is, by any standard of ancient craft, accomplished work. Their diet was also distinctive. Zooarchaeological analysis, the study of animal bones from excavation contexts, has shown that early Philistine sites contain significant quantities of pig and dog bones, species whose consumption appears to have been far more restricted in the Israelite and broader Canaanite cultural zone. This dietary difference, visible in the bone deposits, aligns with what we might expect of a population with Aegean cultural origins, and it may be part of the cultural boundary marking that fed the sharp sense of distinction the biblical texts reflect. Philistine religious practice is attested at multiple sites. The temple at Tel Miqne-Ekron, excavated in the 20th century, revealed a well-preserved cult structure with an inner sanctuary and two central load-bearing pillars supporting the main roof. The structural parallel to the Temple of Dagon at Gaza, described in the Samson narrative in Judges 16, where Samson takes hold of the two central pillars and brings the roof down, is widely noted in the scholarly literature. Whether it reflects a consistent tradition in Philistine sacred architecture or a coincidence of construction technique is debated, but the biomechanics of the account become considerably more plausible in light of what the archaeology shows. The picture that emerges from a century of excavation is not the picture the word Philistine carries in popular usage today. The cultural insult to call someone a Philistine is to call them a barbarian, uncultured, hostile to beauty and learning, is a remarkably unfair legacy for a people whose material culture was sophisticated, whose cities were economically complex, and whose origins were, if the DNA evidence holds, genuinely remarkable. Migrants from the far Aegean who crossed the collapsing Bronze Age world and built something new on a coastal plain in Canaan. Several important qualifications apply to the current scholarly picture. The 2019 Feldman study is significant, but ancient DNA analysis of this period remains technically demanding, and the sample sizes are small. The study's conclusions, that a European-sourced genetic component appears in the founding population and diminishes in later generations, are well supported within the study's own data, but scholars have noted that a larger data set would strengthen the conclusions. The identification of Tel es-Safi as Gath and Tel Miqne-Ekron are now broadly accepted in the field, though the identification of Gath remains based on a convergence of evidence rather than a single definitive inscription equivalent to the Ekron dedicatory text. The question of the Sea People's relationship to the Philistines specifically is also more complex than popular accounts suggest. The Egyptian records at Medinet Habu describe a coalition of named groups, among them the Peliset, widely identified with the Philistines. But the precise relationship between the Egyptian label and the cultural group that established itself at Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron remains a subject of ongoing research. The Philistines were almost certainly part of a larger migration event, but their specific journey is not yet fully mapped. What the archaeological record confirms, beyond reasonable dispute, is that the Philistines were not a monolithic or static culture. They arrived as something, they became something else, and the cities they built lasted for centuries. History assigns its villains carefully, and it rarely revises them. The Philistines became the emblem of brute opposition to everything Israel represented, militarily, culturally, spiritually. That role was written into Scripture with such narrative force that it has defined the word Philistine in a dozen languages for 3,000 years. No archaeologist has ever found a single text written by a Philistine about themselves. Everything we had, for centuries, was what their enemies said about them. And then someone started digging, and the jars appeared, and the temples, and the infant bones with their unexpected DNA. And slowly, under the trowel, a people came back. There is something worth sitting with in that. The Philistines crossed a collapsing world, built cities, developed a distinctive art, buried their dead, pressed their olives, and raised their children under floors that would not be opened for 3 millennia. They did not know they were the villains in someone else's story, and perhaps most people never do. Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.